Before we get into the stories, I'm excited to announce I have a new channel called Monster Trail Cams. Here's a quick trailer for my new channel. The link is below. Monster Trail Cams is your ticket to the unseen and supernatural. Sourced from a vast network of mystery hunters worldwide, our channel reveals a collection of strange creatures and supernatural events that will leave you on the edge of your seat. From shadowy figures lurking in dense forests to inexplicable entities prowling under the cloak of night, each chilling clip peels back another layer of the world's untold mysteries. We release new episodes several times a week. Okay, now let's get to the stories. My sister and I spent our childhood summers at our mom's cousin's ranch in Montana. We and our cousins would ride horses through the woods for hours at a time. We would all head out, doubled up on horseback, and ride on siding roads along pastures and hayfields, and into national forest following old logging roads. There were usually 4 of us, sometimes up to 6, and we often had our cousins' dogs along too. I was pretty young the first time I remember seeing what we all referred to as the phantom of the fork in the road. I was probably around 3 or 4 years old, which lets you know how significant these experiences were, as that is awfully young to remember stuff. I remember coming out of our family's timbered property into a clearing that had 2 other dirty pathways kind of spoking out of a gated fence. You could go straight ahead on the same small dirt road we were on, veer to the left or veer right, and have to climb down from your horse and open a barbed wire and log gate to continue into the national forest land. Our route took us right. When riding up to the clearing, you had a good view of the entire scene from a ways back. The fork was entirely empty of people and animals. We were all riding and chatting, and then one by one we all got quiet as our minds adjusted to what we were seeing. It was like blinking a blurry image into focus. Where we had all been looking as we emerged from the timberline, there had been nothing. Then a man began to take shape right at the fork. He was just standing there in a plaid flannel, work pants, and boots. The thing that spooked me as a tiny kid was that he carried a rifle in his hand. We slowed the horses but continued toward the clearing as we wanted to open the gated road into the Forest Service land. My sister, several years older than me, asked our cousin, "Do you know who that is?" She replied, "No, but he never bothers us." I remember thinking that it was all right considering our cousins had run into him before. I don't recall if the dogs were with us this time, but the horses did not respond strangely. We passed within 12 or 15 feet of him as we rode up to the gate. He appeared very solid. He was very real looking. You could make out the seams and buttons on his clothing and the tooling of his rifle sling. My oldest cousin dismounted and opened the gate, and we all rode through, leading her horse. We turned to watch her close the gate, and the man was still standing back where we had first seen him, watching us watching him. My cousin got back on her horse, and we took a final glance up to the man, but he was not there. It couldn't have been more than 8 to 10 seconds from the last time we saw him. There was nowhere he could have moved that quickly and quietly. We would have seen or heard him run off. I was so young I didn't think much of it. I was more excited to keep riding, but I remember the older kids, the oldest was 16 years old, being pretty weirded out by it. One of my cousins said, "Yep, that's what he does." This was not a one-time event. It happened at least 4 more times over about 6 summers. Always the same man, same place, same clothing, same gun. The same image coming into focus as we rode by, and then looking back at nothing. The last time I saw the phantom, I was 11 years old, and my 14-year-old cousin and I were riding alone. The exact same thing happened as had unfolded all those times before. He never spoke to us. We never spoke to him. The dogs never seemed to even notice him, and the horses didn't react. I went back in my 20s to see if maybe I could conjure him up, but never saw him. I just wanted to see, with the advantage of adulthood, what those experiences had been and either try to come up with a rational explanation or be convinced that he really was a paranormal being. This story took place in Hardyville, South Carolina around 2009 at a house my mom and stepfather built. My stepfather, we will call him Roy, had gotten a call that his cousin had passed away suddenly due to a gruesome car accident. He made plans to take the day off for the funeral coming up. The day of the funeral, my mom and Roy let me stay home since I was still kinda young and didn't really know the guy. So I stayed home and finished painting the hallway walls and the trim for my mom and listened to the radio as I worked. I was probably 15 at the time. Nothing new with staying home alone. I was an only child and matured quickly, so I was pretty responsible. A few hours went by and they arrived back home. I just want to mention, even though I was painting, I didn't have any windows open. We had central air with good circulation, and it was pretty cold outside, so I kept them closed. We also had no pets at the time. As they walked in the door, I was finishing up at the kitchen sink, washing out the paintbrush. I asked them how the funeral went and how everyone was. With my parents behind me talking, a door from the other side of the house slammed out of nowhere. Now I've heard doors slam. This was no measly slam. Whichever door slammed, it shut so hard you would have thought that the frame cracked. It hurt my ears from the other side of the house. Right after that happened, we all looked at each other with a bewildered and scared look on our faces. My stepfather is a straightforward guy, doesn't really believe in anything supernatural. My mom and I, however, grew up seeing and hearing spirits, so we were certainly believers. So the next step was for someone to go back to the other end of the house to see which door it was and the cause. Roy's face was a little ashen, and he didn't volunteer. I made a cross on my heart right after and started praying that whatever did that would get the hell out of there. I certainly wasn't brave enough to volunteer. So my brave mother volunteered herself as a tribute. She walked down the hallway and made her way through all of the rooms, closets, and bathrooms by herself to check things out. A few minutes later, I hear her coming back down the hall. When she makes it back to the kitchen where Roy and I haven't heard budged from, I see her face looks kind of unsettled. I asked her whose door was shut, mentally hoping it was not mine. She said, "They're all open." Nothing else happened that day, but we were all kind of on edge for a while. Maybe it was Roy's cousin saying goodbye in an odd way. Maybe it was the house itself. A lot of weird things happened there. Even though it was a new build, I think it was the land, or Roy, causing it. Roy wasn't a good guy, so I'm thinking something manifested from his darkness, or the land had some history. Here's a story from back when I lived in Washington, D.C. We lived in a small burb which is split between Maryland and D.C., known as Tacoma Park. TKPK as they call it, and it is known as a very progressive kind of hippie village inside the Beltway of D.C. Some call it the Berkeley of the East. We bought our first home there as it was a relatively inexpensive place to buy a home at the time inside the Beltway. This house was pretty old and sat atop a slight hill, providing you a bit of an overlook towards downtown D.C. You couldn't see much, but an interesting view nonetheless. The property had a long staircase that was very steep, leading to the front porch of the home. One night, I was having a cigarette on the front porch around 1 a.m. At that time, the neighbors would have been in bed so as to not see me smoking. I've had my periods of being off and on, but for the most part don't smoke. As I was smoking, I began hearing this loud thumping sound, yet it was more of a clap than thump. It sounded like someone was running with sneakers on, but there was something very unordinary about it. I look around trying to identify the sound when I peer down from the perch I had from our porch. To my surprise, there is a creature standing less than a foot running at an incredibly fast speed right down the middle of our avenue. I could clearly see it had a small head and body like a human. Honestly, it happened so fast I can't really pinpoint a description. That area does have wildlife. It was common to have deer, squirrels, and foxes in our yard at times. Thought never had I seen anything like that, especially darting down the middle of the road. To this day, I still haven't a clue as to what I saw. I had a strange series of events a few weeks ago. I'm a bit of night owl and don't sleep till 5 or 6 in the morning. One night I had gone to sleep earlier, but as I was just lying there, I heard a strange noise outside my window. I heard a strange chirping like noise at 4 in the morning. There's no owls near my house. Cats occasionally wander my neighborhood, but not near my house. I call it chirping, but it wasn't like how a bird chirps. Even more, it was like 2 different sets of chirping. It sounded like 2 creatures talking. I use the term creatures because the next day I asked a family member to check the area as I had to work. I have a photo of a footprint I can't identify. No one in my house would be awake at that time, nor does it look like a shoe. I saw the area after I had gotten out of work. It was still there and looked humanoid. I haven't heard anything like it since, but it's had me in alert. My second strange event happened in 2016 and near my house. I'd gone for a walk in the summer and lost track of time. It was near 9 in the evening, and I was walking towards my neighborhood as I saw a strange being. It looked like it was in some sort of camouflage like the predator, but shaped like a person. It kind of took the shape of myself. It was about my height, 5'7", and kind of skinny. I could vaguely see through it. It was about 10 feet away from me. I was hesitant to move closer to it. I took a few steps to move closer. It started to disappear after moving closer to it. I finally walked home in a hurry and tried to put it out of my mind. Back in the mid-1970s, I was given temporary duty orders to a school at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola. This was a 4-month school at the Navy hospital there, so I was able to take my wife and our 1-year-old daughter along with me. We were lucky enough to find an available 1-bedroom apartment immediately off the causeway to the main gate of the base. This was an older apartment complex, probably about 30 years old or so. With our move and disruption to our lives, this gave our daughter some challenges, and it was very hard for her to fall asleep in our bedroom with us. For several weeks, she would often cry for hours and hours before she went to sleep. So one night, we decided to let her stay in the room and cry until she would finally fall asleep. My wife and I stayed in the living room watching the television with all of the lights off, except for the bathroom light. After a while, we heard a rattling noise from the front door. Thinking it was our neighbors coming home, we turned toward the door and noticed something very strange. Soon thereafter, our daughter stopped crying. After a few minutes, my wife turned to me and asked me if I saw something. I told her that I had. I saw an older woman in a nightgown float through the wall from the hallway and through the door to our bedroom. She was luminous and was indeed floating and not walking. My wife responded that this is exactly what she witnessed as well. It was immediately after that our daughter stopped crying. From then on, she didn't have a problem falling asleep at night. Needless to say, my wife and I slept in the living room during the rest of our stay there in Florida. Once you witness something like that, there is no one that could ever convince either of us that ghosts don't exist. This is something I don't talk about with many people. In fact, it's only one other person, and that's on occasion. I am comfortable talking to this friend about it because he experienced the same thing on the same night as my former brother-in-law and I did. The only thing was we had to be an easy 10 to 20 miles apart, if not more. This happened years and years ago when I was 16 or 17. I'm 33 now. My ex-brother-in-law and myself decided we wanted to go fishing on a small pond on the side of Sadler Road in Bristol, Michigan. To give context, Bristol is a small town in mid-northern Michigan. It consists of a party store, gas station, and a town hall straight out of a Clint Eastwood movie. Most land out there is state land or national forest. In other words, lots of critters and wildlife. It's not uncommon to see, smell, or hear black bear. White-tailed deer are everywhere. We even have the occasional bobcat, lynx, and mountain lion. I have spent more than my fair share of time in the woods there. Countless nights on the Muskegon River, salmon fishing till 3 or 4 in the morning, sometimes until sunrise. Sitting in the deer blind, hours before sunlight. So I have heard just about everything you can hear in the northern lower peninsula of Michigan. But this night we heard something that scared the three of us to the core. My ex-brother-in-law and I decided to go do some fishing around sunset. As I said, we decided on a small pond off a dirt road in the middle of the wood. By the time we got there, the sun was still up, but getting ready to set. The pond butted up right against the shoulder of the road, maybe 2 or 3 feet off the road. This pond can't be more than 2 acres. One side is marshy and hard to get to the water. The rest is surrounded by this woodland. I went to the right side of the pond after fishing from the road for a bit. By the time I worked my way through the trees, my ex-brother-in-law had worked his way to the left. He made it through the marshy land to the water. I was catching little bluegill and other panfish on my side. He wasn't catching anything where he was, so he decided to move over by me. Doing so may have saved his life. I feel it did anyways. When he got to my side, the sun had finally set, and with that it was starting to get difficult to see. At this point, we heard nothing out of the ordinary and were not concerned about anything. When out of nowhere, from the opposite side of the pond, we heard the most bone-chilling sound I've ever heard, including to this day. Keep in mind, this is only maybe 2 to 5 minutes after my ex-brother-in-law left that exact area. We didn't see anything, or at least I didn't. He never said if he did. But this creature, whatever it was, did not want us there, and it was made very clear. It was so loud and ear-piercing that it literally made your heart skip. Like I said, I've heard a lot of the critters out there. This was not a natural sound. It was a high-pitched scream blended with a low demonic growl. Neither of us are small guys, nor scare very easily. This creature was either there when we got there and was watching us for over an hour, or it moved through the thick overgrowth and we never heard it. From the sound, this wasn't anything small, it had to be incredibly large. Either way, just the sound it made caused 2 decent-sized backwoods guys to sprint out of the woods and throw our fishing gear into the car, and we raced away. The only thing that was said on the ride home was, "That better have been someone screwing with us." It wasn't until a few days later a friend that is more of a woodsy person than myself. In fact, he is former military. Anyway, he told my ex-brother-in-law that almost 10+ miles away at another body of water known as Wide Waters, on the same night around the same time he heard the exact same sound. He said it was so evil that even he packed up and went home. Everyone has their Sasquatch Bigfoot encounter or stories. This, whatever it was no Bigfoot. It was pure evil, and it was clear if we didn't leave when we did, we may have not left those woods at all. What I do think it was is something some say is a legend and is not real, but I know for sure it was dogman. To this day, when I'm camping or fishing, I'm always on alert, especially at or near nighttime. Even here in Iowa, where I live now, it gave me a whole new respect for the woods. You're probably doing better than I am. I was just fired from my job because of something I saw. For several years, I've been working for this company that creates VR and 3D interactive photos for the purposes of construction, selling real estate, logistics, creating virtual tours for companies. My latest assignment was to do a 3D scan of one floor of an old office building the client was trying to rent out. I have to say, right off the bat, this place gave me the creeps. I was ready to take the photos and 3D scans of this place and get out of there as quickly as possible. When I took the first scan, I couldn't capture anything in the room because of what appeared like a thick white fog that covered the entire room. I didn't see any fog in there with my eyes, so I figured it had to be smudges on the lenses of the 3D camera. I cleaned the lenses and I tried to capture the room again. When I looked at the footage of the scan, all that showed up was what looked like a dense fog that filled the room again. I was pretty frustrated, and I believed it was a technical malfunction of either the camera or our software that was causing me to waste my time in this run-down, creepy building. I moved on to a room on the other side of the building, thinking maybe it was some sort of electromagnetic interference. After doing another scan, I got the same result and figured I would try again later with different equipment. I took the 3D camera and my computer back to my work and had this guy Eric from the IT department look at the files of the scans. He told me that he'd never seen this happen before and that it must be a glitch with the software on my computer. He gave me another camera and computer and I headed back to the old building. As soon as I got back in there, I felt uneasy, but I was just ready to complete the job and never come back to that place again. I set up my equipment and took a scan of the main room. When I looked at the footage, it had successfully scanned the whole room, but it looked like there was a red filter on all the footage. It reminded me of those old 007 movies where James Bond shoots the screen and the blood drips down over the camera lens. I tried it several more times and all the footage was still red. I called my boss and explained all the technical malfunctions I was having. He told me to take the equipment to IT and try again tomorrow. The next day, I went up to IT, and Eric told me that all the equipment was working perfectly now. Relieved, I made my way back to the building and was ready to get this job behind me. I set everything up and began the scan. I left the room so I wouldn't be in the footage, and after a few moments, I went back in. I checked the footage, and this time on the computer screen, it said there was an error capturing the scan. I tried again, and when I came back in, my computer said the same thing. I called it and they told me to restart the computer, unplug the camera, and plug it back in. I did as they instructed, and then I couldn't get my computer to register the camera as being plugged in. It told me to bring the equipment to them and they would give me new equipment that they were sure worked perfectly. This was getting old and I was really frustrated, but I headed back to work. I went to IT, gave the old equipment to Eric, picked up the supposed working equipment, and went back to the building. I did another scan, prayed it would work, and went to check on the footage. This time, I had captured the room perfectly, except there was a dark figure of what looked like a man's shadow in the corner of the room. Assuming that this was somehow my own shadow, I set the equipment up to do another scan, ran out of the room, and made sure I left plenty of time for the camera to scan the whole room. Keep in mind, I'd been doing this for years and had never had any problems before. When I got back into the room, the camera was smashed on the ground, and the computer said that the scan was incomplete. This camera had a round stand on the bottom, so it was pretty much impossible for it to tip over. Something must have picked it up and hurled it onto the ground. It was also an expensive camera made of sturdy metal. It wasn't the type of thing to break easily. I freaked out, grabbed everything, and ran out of there. I took it to It and explained what happened. He looked at me like I was crazy, so I begged him to look at my past captures, the fog, the redness, the dark figure, and my last attempt for anything out of the ordinary. The computer read that the scan was incomplete, but Eric was able to extract what the camera had captured before it was smashed. There was a gray hand reaching toward the camera. We both froze and stared at it. I was terrified and asked him to send me the files. I ran to my boss's office and explained to him what had happened. He accused me of lying and fired me on the spot for destroying company property and for time theft. I begged him to look at the footage and told him I wasn't lying, but he had security escort me out of the building with all my stuff. Later, I called Eric to send me the files, and he told me to meet him for coffee. At the coffee shop, Eric told me that our boss had all the files erased and the computer that I captured it on destroyed. I still can't believe this happened to me. Why were the spirits in the building so hostile to me? I don't understand why my boss acted the way he did towards me. Why would he want the evidence destroyed? Why did he want me fired so quickly? So many unanswered questions, and I'm forced to just move on and get another job. I'm still in shock over everything that happened.